All right, welcome to this week's live event. We are live in the Facebook group Women Healing from Emotional Abuse with Power, Passion, and Pleasure. And you may also be watching this later on YouTube. So welcome, my name is Ailsa Kepi. I'm a somatic intimacy coach, sex educator, and body worker. And sort of lifestyle guide now and then that I get told as well. So welcome if this is one of the first videos you're watching. We go live every week in the group, and today we're going to deal with the topic of do we have unrealistic expectations in our relationships? And this is specifically looking at us as survivors, if you will, of emotional abuse. If you've been through emotional, physical, sexual abuse, oftentimes this has shaped our understanding of how to be in relationships, what to expect in relationships. And so what we want to look at as we're healing from these things is, have we actually changed our expectations to become more realistic? And I thought it was a really interesting saying to look at the idea that a reasonable expectation is not always realistic. You know, sometimes we have reasonable expectations of what we want in relationship, but we're not being realistic when we're actually looking at the relationship we're in right at the moment. So one aspect you might be in, if you are still in an abusive relationship or you're not sure, is, you know, do your expectations, if they're reasonable, like I should be respected in a relationship, are they realistic with your current person that you're in relationship with? Is this person able to be respectful? So that might be something that you want to kind of put in your mind as we go through this talk. Where do these expectations come from? Typically, our expectations come from the past. We take our past experiences, our belief systems, our values that we've been brought up with, and we bring that into the present and we say, this is our expectation moving forward in relationship. And sometimes that serves us and sometimes it doesn't. You know, if we have expectations that our partner, our intimate partner, will live up to our idealized father that maybe died when we were 5 years old, so we never actually got to know him as an adult, or as, you know, got to know him as a person when we were actually able to realistically look at that, and we maybe idealized our father, and that, you know, that idea of a man is brought forward to our current relationships, and we expect, you know, all men that we're involved with to live up to that expectation, that they can provide everything, that they can, always be loving and caring and kind, and that's just, unrealistic on a lot of cases, because we're all human and we're not, however much we like to think we're able to be always loving, there's probably always love there, but it may not be always what people show on the outside. I know that I have a tendency to withdraw, and I can be kind of even mean sometimes if I'm just not in the mood to be loving right then, and that has nothing to do with whether I love my partner or not. So where did those expectations come from in a relationship? Did we grow up with the picture perfect family, or we were never allowed to talk about anything that we weren't happy about? Therefore, we may think we have an expectation that, when we're in a relationship, it will look like this perfect family or something. But really underneath, there was a lot of angst, perhaps, in your family, if that was the case. And if there was this underlying issue and nobody ever talked about it, then you may have this expectation that your family live up to this really high, unrealistic expectation of this amazing family, but you don't know how to do that because, in your family there were all these other feelings going on underneath as well. It's quite complex. How did our past shape our current expectations? And part of the the challenge or the work, I guess, that I do with clients quite often is we look at what has your past experience been, and we kind of go through a timeline, because it's really helpful to kind of look at, oh, okay, these are the events that happened in my life, and here's what's shaped my idea of what a relationship is. So, we may also have this idea that closeness can bring up anxiety and tension. Many of us are afraid of vulnerability. We're afraid of intimacy. We're afraid of being vulnerable because we are used to being hurt, perhaps, or we have been hurt in the past. So again, we're bringing these past things forward. And if we've had hurt, or we're afraid of anger, let's say one of our parents or somebody close to us had extreme outbursts of anger, we may not be willing to deal with anger or conflict in a relationship. And that's an unrealistic expectation when we come to a new intimate relationship and say, well, there's going to be conflict, there just always is. How do we deal with that? Can we actually work through that? So what's really interesting is, it's kind of obvious most intelligent people they can spout off, realistic expectations of a relationship. But when we dig a little deeper, are we actually able to feel into that? I'll give you an example. Let's say we know that relationships require work. We pretty much all, everybody says, yeah, relationships are hard work. Okay, so we know that up here in our head. So here's where we need to get into the body and really be honest about how we feel about that. Because when I talk to a lot of women about, moving forward with the kind of work, transformational work that helps us move forward in relationships, often, we talk about, oh yeah, relationships require work. But when we start talking, they're like, oh, I shouldn't have to do that. I shouldn't have to, put in this time. I shouldn't have to explain that to them. I shouldn't have to, and there's lots of, it should just be easy kind of feelings. So, it is interesting to really get honest with ourselves and look at, okay, relationship requires work. What does that actually realistically look like? It might look like having a really difficult conversation. It might look like you going and blowing off some steam at the gym and getting over your frustration from work before you go home. It's unrealistic to go home and expect that your partner can just take on all of your frustrations. Maybe they've had a hard day too. So, we have to kind of look at the work that's involved, and are we actually acknowledging that and knowing what that means and looks like. Another one might be that that both of you may change in a relationship. So again, this is kind of a pretty commonly known thing about relationships. Yeah, I want to accept that I can change and my partner can change and we can grow. But really, when we start looking at ourselves deep inside, we feel threatened when there's any change. If our partner suddenly wants to go take up a basketball once a week and not spend every evening with us, we feel threatened. Is he going to find someone else? Is he going to not want to spend time with me? Is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? And we feel threatened by that. So, we know that, relationships should allow each person to change, but we feel threatened when that is actually happening. So again, it's something to be really honest with ourselves about, and also to get support around how do we, be able to feel that vulnerability, feel that feeling of being threatened. And hey, Carrie, and how do we stay with that and deal with our own feelings? And that is a lot about how I work with people, is changing, connecting what we know up here with what we know in our body, because we're not always functioning in an integrated way. Another possibility is that that your partner can't make up for love deficits in childhood. So perhaps you didn't get perfect parenting. Really, who does, right? So we look to our intimate relationships to kind of make up for that. And again, we kind of know that that's not realistic, but we want that to be the case. We want to be parented. We want to be unconditionally loved. We want all those things, but that's not really, it's not fair or realistic to another adult to expect that they're going to parent us, from childhood. So this is another piece of the work that we can do on our own, or with a therapist, with support. But we need to kind of have our own journey with reparenting ourselves, and that is another aspect of the work that I help people do. So again, if we hang on to what we say up here, but we don't actually integrate and look at, am I actually allowing that? Am I actually feeling into that in my body? And am I allowing myself to have realistic expectations of a new relationship, or even of an old relationship? Do we have realistic expectations of our partner? One thing that comes up a lot with women that have been in abusive relationships is, we get ourselves out of the relationship, and perhaps you have children with this person, and all of a sudden now your interactions with your ex are about the children. And in your mind, it makes absolute reasonable sense that when you're dealing with your kids, the person would be respectful and on time, and be fair about who pays for what. But here's the thing: is it realistic to expect someone that you probably, if they were like that and they actually did respect all those things, you wouldn't have split up with them in the first place? So if you're taking that kind of a viewpoint that, oh, now that we're dealing with the kids, they're suddenly going to become this person that is respectful and values your time and money and effort, and helps with the kids and is loving and kind and isn't going to talk bad behind your back. If those are unrealistic expectations, because if the person that was like that, you'd probably still be with them. So it's unrealistic to expect them to change too much when you're dealing with the kids. It's unfortunate, it really is, and very sad that can't be the case, but that's where we have to really look at what is reasonable. So what else can we say about that? Well, we can have expectations that we can help someone or fix someone. How many of us got into an abusive relationship because we felt sorry for the person, we felt that we could help them, or they kind of manipulated us into saying, oh, you're the one that makes me a better person. You help me get over my addiction. You help me with, my behavior. When I'm with you, I feel, I can do anything. And so they hook us into that, and we get hooked into feeling like we can save them, fix them, rescue them, whatever word you want to put on that. How can we be realistic about that expectation? Because, at the end of the day, here's the hard truth: we cannot fix anyone. We can't. It's not because we're not pretty enough, we're not good enough, we're not working hard enough, we don't love them enough. It's not to do with any of that. If that person does not choose to change, we cannot do anything about it. And as much as you want, you may have, I have 4 children with my ex. You would really hope that having 4 kids would change someone. It doesn't necessarily change them. So they have to choose to change, and we can't do anything about that. And, however sad that is for the kids and for you and for the future people that get involved with that person, you cannot change them. And so that actually makes us, or can make us, feel really powerless, and we don't like that feeling of powerlessness. So we keep holding on to that unrealistic expectation that if I do, if I get them into therapy, that will help. If I can do something better, it will help. And we have this unrealistic expectation of ourselves, and that in and of itself isn't helpful. If we're expecting that we can change someone's trajectory in their life when they're not wanting to do it for themselves, it's horribly sad and devastating, especially if there's kids involved. But it's we have to be realistic. We have to put that mirror up and really look in it. So that's another thing that where we get caught, because we don't want to feel that we're powerless. We want to feel that we had some kind of control or power. And that's something that a lot of us have to grapple with as we start to heal from emotional abuse, is that we want to feel like we have some kind of impact in the world, right? We want to feel that we aren't just overlooked or run over or however ignored perhaps. And this may have been our experience as a young person or in other relationships, and we want to feel that now I did something, I helped this person. And I would just without becoming narcissistic, what we have to do is kind of turn that to ourselves and try to develop a sense of self, because a lot of us don't have a sense of self at all. So when we turn that towards ourselves, we try to help to create something that we can actually build boundaries around, that we can build a healthy relationship with, that we actually come saying, here am I, here's what is realistic about me, and I can see you and what is realistic about you, and I can understand what is realistic as a relationship between both of us. And that requires that we get out of our our fantasies. A lot of the time we get out of our past expectations from the past. We should, we don't need to bring our past experiences into it. We need to be realistic with what's here right now. And to do that, we need to be really present and grounded in our body. We need to be aware of our intuition. We need to be aware of our feelings. So, that brings us out of the clouds, so to speak, and into our body. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from today, is the importance of finding that grounding within our body, because that gives us that wisdom, that integrated wisdom to really make clear choices and to be able to see clearly and feel clearly what's going on with ourselves and with other people. So coming out of our fantasy life and into reality. And I usually share a little bit about my own personal journey. I didn't have a hugely abusive childhood, but what I did have was I was perhaps quite sensitive. There was a lot of conflict in our house, and in order to escape the conflict, what I tended to do as a coping mechanism was kind of create stories and fantasy worlds in my head, where I could go up to my room and kind of fantasize about, scenarios that I wanted to happen. And because I got really good at that, I brought that into, as I grew up and I kind of moved out in the world, I brought that kind of fantasy world with me. And when I started to have relationships, intimate relationships, I would often bring those fantasies that I dreamed up when I was, I don't know, like 10, 11, 12 years old, into my 20-year-old self relationships or 25-year-old self relationships. And I would still be bringing those fantasies back and saying, oh, the Prince Charming, or this is how relationships should look, this is how the first kiss should be, this is how this. And when I brought those fantasies into what was actually happening, I wasn't always aware of what was actually happening in the moment. I was just living out my fantasy because that was how I survived as a young person. And I didn't know how to stay grounded and feel the complex feelings that relationships require. Relationships aren't really black and white. They're all gray, and we have all sorts of mixed feelings about them, about the person, about us. It feels, vulnerability feels confusing if we're not used to it. And so having that inability to stay grounded in my body kind of led me to make some really poor choices in my relationships, because I was, creating unrealistic, fantasy expectations. And then, not even just realizing that they were unrealistic, I would just make excuses, make it seem like that was what was happening, even though it wasn't. And it took many years before I was really able to kind of take off the glasses and actually go, whoa, okay, this is what is actually happening, and here's how I'm going to get out of that. And so one of the biggest things that we can help ourselves with is to actually start creating kind of a catalog of what would a relationship look like that was, had realistic expectations attached to it. And some of these things that we mentioned, expecting to be respected, how does that look? And talking to more people about that. Talking to couples that have stayed together for many years is a really great way to get some reality checks about it. I made a point to ask a number of couples that have been married for, a few decades. And most of them are very honest, and they laugh and they're like, we didn't even like each other for a couple of years in here or there. And I didn't want to move when my, partner got a job in a different city. And I was really angry about that. And there was lots of those times where, things didn't look so rosy. And so I think that's part of life, and part of, if we want that kind of a long-term relationship, to realize that there may be weeks or months where things aren't going so well, and how do we deal with that kind of conflict, and unsettledness, and now we're kind of all getting used to dealing with the uncertainty with the pandemic, and nothing's really certain, which makes some of us turn to our relationships in a way of like, please help me, save me. This has to be steady and has to be the way that I want it, because I need something to be secure in my life. So if you notice yourself doing that, take a step back, ask yourself if it's possible to look at having a relationship with yourself that can be the stable rock in your life. And maybe we can do a further video about this, like how to create some safety and security with yourself, because really everything out there is not so stable or secure, and living with uncertainty is going to be a reality for all of us moving forward. So how can we take that on and be okay with it, and not grasp at fantasies or grasp at the other person to make it right, because life is uncertain, unfortunately. So that's kind of dancing around a lot of these topics, but hopefully it gives you some things to think about. Thanks for watching. Those of you who are here live, it's great to have some comments there. Happy New Year to all of you. And if you do have a topic that you'd like me to address here in the group, PM me with the topic, or let me know kind of what you're interested in learning about. As always, for any of you watching this video, there's a few spots available with me for an hour-long breakthrough call. It's absolutely free. If you feel like you want to have that chance to talk personally with me and let's hash out the reality of your particular situation, please do reach out. I'll put the link in the comments. It's www.ailsakepi.com/apply, APPLY, and you get straight to my booking calendar. There's a few spots there. If one of them's for you, make sure you grab it. More than happy to talk to any one of you and get some clarity around what's going on for you in your relationships. All right, take care.